Good evening, everyone. Welcome. To a lot of the familiar faces who have been to a lot of these green drinks now, welcome back. To those who inadvertently stumbled into a really good conversation, welcome, and thank you for being here also. I'm Brad Miller. I'm the taproom manager up here for Topa Topa. We are a very proud 1% for the planet company. We always have a different partner. We do 2 different partners twice a year. And we work with Chris to do a monthly event here called Green Drinks. Tonight, we have Steve Colome, forgive me. My inflection was always off. And he's with Sea Frog. So we're going to be talking about the sustainability plan for Ventura County. It's always a great event for us. We're a big fan of Chris for putting this on, and I'll turn it over for him to make all the introductions. Thank you very much.
For those of you that don't know, Green Drinks is a monthly gathering of folks that are involved in some capacity, whether they work or just passion about sustainability, and quickly about resiliency in the Ventura County, and especially Ojai Valley. So this is probably our 6th annual, or 6th monthly, I should say. Next month, it'll feature a program about waste, and it's funny, it kind of just comes to me because here's a good example of what we could be doing differently as far as waste. Everybody gets the Ojai Valley directory. I'm not sure how many people are still looking at the Ojai Valley directory, but it's a resource. But just in case the Ojai Valley directory is too big for you, there is a small version of the Ojai Valley directory that maybe you take it with you. It's more compact, whatnot. And just in case that that's not good enough, there's also a version that's bagged for the Ojai Valley directory. And so when we look at these things, we're like, if rain was in the forecast, that would be one thing, but we all know, this showed up in our driveways or at our businesses, whatnot, just the other day, yesterday, in fact, 2 days ago. We know that rain's nowhere near. So just kind of asking those questions of, is this necessary as we start to look at our footprint, as we start to hear about other communities making commitments to zero waste. LA just made a zero waste commitment by 2050. I think we've got other regions making zero waste. In fact, Stephen, what were we talking about? What's by 2030?
Well, 2030, Stanford University.
Stanford University is committed to zero waste by 2030.
2050, the County of LA.
And then the County of LA, 2050, right?
And the city.
And the city. But as a small community, we need to say we deserve better. We actually need to take pride in being a blueprint for what the future could be. We are a small, nimble, agile community. So these are the type of things that we could rethink this. That's right. We could rethink this, though, and serve as an example for other communities. So we're going to talk next month about waste and where are other locations and opportunities for that. So do encourage you to show up for next month. Last month we had a really engaging discussion around microgrids and resiliency, and great timing. Is that an Edison truck driving by? I think it is. So they've been out here, for the last couple weeks, right? Hardening all our lines and putting this year's version of the Band-Aid on the grid. So we'll see if this one works. I won't be too political on that. But nonetheless, it made the front page of Ojai Valley News, and it's very exciting to see that microgrids are a big step forward in what we consider resiliency, especially on the first responders, the fire departments, the hospitals, the evacuations. A diesel generator system is no longer an adequate solution when you're talking about multiple days on a backup mode for our first responders. And they officially call it the Public Power Safety Shutoff. And so we'll be getting a lot of that, and they have already said that they're going to be more frequent and they're going to be longer. So I predict the first one that hits here, it's going to go bananas. Everyone's going to be running down to Home Depot, not knowing what to do for an 8-hour shutoff during the middle of the day that goes into the night. You've got senior citizens, you've got babies, you got all sorts of things. And so it's really going to create this next, I think, moment of resiliency of what are we doing to prepare our homes, our businesses, and whatnot. So that is something to continue to be thinking about. Now that the anticipation is at its climax, we've got the esteemed Dr. Stephen Colome.
Christopher, thank you. I'd like, first of all, to thank Chris and California Solar Electric and the Topa Topa Brewery and Brad and crew for putting these on. I mean, I think this is, look at this attendance now. Oh, yeah. So the discussion this evening focuses on not the city of Ojai and its general plan, but the county of Ventura and its ongoing general plan process. I really planned this to be a presentation for those who may not have any idea what a general plan is, and I see a number of faces here that I know are very familiar with the process and have been participating. So for those with eagle eyes, you may notice a change in the logo for Sea Frog. It's now reading Climate First, Replace Oil and Gas. The name before had been about responsible oil and gas, but we realized the only responsible thing to do with oil and gas is to wean ourselves of our dependence on oil and gas. So we were renamed. This presentation borrows pretty heavily from a presentation by Kevin Bundy, who is an attorney with Shoot Mahaley, that Sea Frog has hired to help us to look at the general plan as it develops at the county government level. It's a very prestigious law firm in San Francisco, and the funding for that comes both from the city of Ojai as well as the Ojai Valley Defense Fund to support that legal initiative. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to go through this actually fairly quickly. A general plan is something that is set up by state law. There are a number of very specific requirements, but we can think of it as the constitution for an organizing body, whether that be a city or a county. It is comprised of a series of policies, and those policies into the future guide how land use development will occur. It sounds really wonkish, but it's incredibly important to the future and to the composition of what goes on in a jurisdiction. The city of Ojai is also scheduled to begin at some point near its own general plan review process. For the county of Ventura, the general plan is a plan that takes development from the year 2020 to the year 2040. The reason that that's so important to us is that all of us who have been focusing on climate realize that this next time period is critical to the survival of the planet. I mean, it's absolutely critical. And so it's really important, it's vital that that general plan be consistent with our needs for a responsible climate future. So in terms of what we do, what's done in a general plan, and again, I'll go through this relatively quickly because what I'd like to focus on in the time that I have are some of the gaps that exist in the Ventura County General Plan, because I'd like to make this a call to arms for those of you who have not been participating in the process to participate in the process one way or another, showing up at Board of Supervisors meetings, showing up at Planning Commission meetings, writing supporting letters. They're incredibly important in the process, and contributing to causes like Sea Frog that are trying to protect the environment that we have here. So one of the reasons that Sea Frog, the city of Ojai, and the Ojai Valley Defense Fund got involved in this is because of what you see here. We're in a very, very narrow valley, and we need to protect our air resources. We're much more vulnerable than is the rest of Ventura County because of the small volume that everything is potentially diluted into in this valley. So we set out to make sure that a area plan that we have within the county's general plan continues to assure that our air is protected. But there's a broader set of sort of goals and requirements here. So what does it do? It actually, a general plan determines where and what kinds of development occur, and it really sets up the future for the county. One of the requirements, and this may be too small to read, the state of California mandates that certain elements be involved in a plan, and there are other elements that are allowed as optional elements. So I'm going to focus on the optional elements of the area plan, which is the Ojai area plan, and climate change, which is a new element within the county plan that I'm going to give you the final result here is incredibly poorly done by this county and its county consultants. So what has the county done? They've put together something that they called Appendix B. The entire plan is 1,200 pages long, so it's 3 times the size of the Mueller report. Not very many people dig into that, as not many people have dug into the Mueller report. And it really takes some patience to do that. If you want to look at one section that compiles all of the climate-related policies, you can look at their Appendix B on climate change. One of the first problems I think that the county did was they decided, and it sounds fancy, that they would have climate policies be cross-cutting. By that, that means that within each of the other elements, so for instance within housing, within transportation, the task forces that got together would come up with climate policies. The problem is that those groups were mostly concerned about the element that they were responsible for. So at the end of the day, somebody said, hey, but we've got to cross-cut climate. What can you in housing or what can you in transportation do to address climate? So it wasn't their primary objective. It wasn't their primary goal. So we have a whole lot of policies that are very, very wishy-washy. Policies like we shall, now that's strong legal language, we shall encourage the members of the community to be conserving. I mean, it's stuff that has there's no way to measure it, there's no way to evaluate it, there's no way to enforce it. So my wife is a planner. What we talk about is a lot of the policies that are in the general plan now, in the draft general plan, are good candidates for how not to write a policy for a Planning 101 class. They're really, really poorly conceived and constructed. So here's what I want to get to. We're going to talk really briefly about the Trojan horse, the upside down inventory, and the invisible elephant. So the Trojan horse, there is a policy in this which was actually one of the main reasons why the city and the Ojai Valley Defense Fund and Seafrog got involved in this in the beginning. The Air Pollution Agency for Ventura County has something called a set of guidelines. Now, guidelines are really general. They don't even rise to the legal level of a rule in the air districts. But this was adopted by the county, and it was used as an excuse to say, if a project has to go through review of the air agency, even though it has real emissions, from the perspective of the planning department evaluating those emissions, they treat them as zero. Meaning that the air agency is responsible for making sure that over time we meet the federal and state air quality standards, so we won't count any of the real emissions that they're responsible for. So this is a Trojan horse for a couple of reasons. One is we wanted in the Ojai Valley to protect the lower threshold that we have. We have a 5 pound per day threshold before which stricter environmental review is required. And that's because of our topography. The rest of the county has a 25-pound limit. This Trojan horse essentially releases that limit and says, okay, Ojai, you've kept your 5-pound limit, but any project which is permitted by the Air Board, that is 0 because it's in our guidelines. That's policy number HAZ hazard 1011. Anyone who wants to write a recommendation should say that needs to be killed. That doesn't belong in the general plan. It's a Trojan horse waiting to be released. The upside down inventory. I'm an air quality guy, and this is a really kind of wonkish thing, but we can't know anything about the air impacts without knowing what the sources are. And the County of Ventura has never done a proper emission inventory. They went and there's a group called the VCREA, Ventura County Regional Energy Authority, and they went to SoCal Gas and SoCal Edison, and they said, what are the emissions? And so the focus was very utility-centric. We don't have information on a lot of other sources. Also, we don't have any good information on oil and gas emissions. So they've continued to propagate this. It's a very flawed emission inventory. What you should do, and it's actually fairly simple, is just identify all of the sources, multiply an emission factor, and add them up. It's incredibly straightforward, but the county took a very backward approach to that. So another recommendation would be to make sure that the emission inventory is redone and is accurate. So, the invisible elephant. The emission inventory is done as a pie, and it includes things like all of the emissions from cars, all of the emissions from the natural gas plants, and so forth. What they don't say anything about is that we are an oil and gas producer. We're not only an oil and gas producer, but we are the 3rd largest in the state of California, behind Kern County and Los Angeles County. And so if you add up the natural gas that's produced and the oil that's pumped here, we are a big contributor. If you go through all 1,200 pages of that document, you can barely find the word oil or gas in that document. You don't even know in this, the section on economic vitality that we are a producer of oil and gas. I mean, what an omission is that? And do you think that's by mistake? No, not at all. So if we took the downstream emissions from the use and burning of that oil and gas that we're responsible for producing, that pie all of a sudden grows by 3. It's huge. And so the county should not be allowed to proceed without acknowledging and responding to the downstream emissions that we are responsible for. And I'll use technical terms. So downstream means where does this stuff go? So it goes by truck, and some of it by pipeline, and it ends up in the refineries, or in the case of the natural gas, it goes directly into pipelines and it's been cleaned up. So it goes somewhere, it's burned, and if we are going to address the climate crisis, because it truly is a climate crisis, we not only have to reduce the demand for oil and gas, but we have to start ratcheting back on the production. We can't do it only with one leg. And so that ratcheting down is something that needs to be explicit in the general plan. And so that leads to another issue, which, again, if any of you can get engaged in this, I think we need to articulate and request, is a good policy has measurable goals and objectives. If you look at the city of Los Angeles, they say we will plant 900,000 trees by the year 2022 or 2021. That is measurable. You can look and determine whether or not the municipality, the organization accomplished that. And you can look at further progress to that end. We have a bunch of mamby-pamby, not measurable, no endpoint policies that are in that current draft. So the only way we're going to change that is massive public participation. The Board of Supervisors is meeting August 6th to discuss the current draft plan and to direct the consultants and the staff on what needs to be in the environmental impact report. So you should be, we'll send out a, in fact, Chris, maybe, do you have you have a mailing list of people who are here, right? Yeah. So I will give you a linkable set of suggestions and references that you can look at between now and the 6th. At least get a letter into your supervisor saying, we need and want and demand a good climate action plan. Absolutely essential. What's up here on the 6th, the whispers were in my ear, is a public meeting. It's going to be in the Ventura County offices in the boardroom, and it'll be all day. That particular meeting will not end anytime soon. There are too many issues. And they're going to go over all of the different elements of the plan. So it would be if you could spare the day, it would be an interesting way to bring yourself up to speed, to see what the arguments are, what the comments of your Board of Supervisors are. But the supervisor for this district is Steve Bennett. Again, I think it is important to send your notes to all of the supervisors. There will be, and the date's not clear, a draft environmental impact report. And from my perspective, if we don't have a decent climate action plan that has measurable goals that can be shown that we're making progress to that in the next 20 years, it's not an acceptable plan. So, really keep that in mind. Look closely at the documents. What needs to be done is another 2 years worth of work, and I would agree with that completely. The consultant that was hired, I think they were misdirected by county staff, is my personal view, and were not given a proper charge. So they weren't asked to come up with a real climate action plan. Now the goals are really laudable. The main goal is that by 2050 we should have reduced our climate emissions by 80% from the 2015 level. That's a reasonable goal and target. I mean, I think the county and the city of Los Angeles are both more aggressive than that. And I think as we revisit that and when we realize the extent of the climate crisis, we could encourage the county to be even more aggressive. But the problem, as Jeffrey's indicating, is that there's no way, I will say, as someone who understands what these policies do, there's no way in the world the combined set of policies that are now in the draft are going to be able to make reasonable further progress toward that laudable goal. It just won't happen. And so the consultants have really pushed back and avoided any quantification of the emission reduction, and they're pushing it off to the environmental impact report. So that's going to be too late. That's going to be too late in terms of the goal that the current Board of Supervisors have of approving a plan by 2020 and when they get out of office.